They locked a healer in a cage for 6 years and forced him to fix what they broke. When he finally broke free, he didn't just heal himself, he rewrote the entire world. His name is Kaelen Ashvane. In his first life, he was born with the rarest gift in the kingdom: divine restoration, the ability to heal any wound, cure any poison, rebuild any shattered bone. Sounds like a blessing until you realize what people do to someone they can't afford to lose. They don't protect him. They chain him. The Crimson Fang Guild discovered Kaelen when he was 12 years old, a street orphan healing a stray dog's broken leg with nothing but his bare hands. Guild Master Draven saw the golden light pour from the boy's palms and smiled. Not the kind of smile that means good things are coming. The kind that means someone just found a tool they plan to use until it shatters. Within a week, Kaelen was in the guild's basement, healing warriors after dungeon raids, fixing shattered ribs and torn muscles, working 16 hours a day because injured fighters can't earn if they can't move. And Kaelen's healing was so powerful that recovery time dropped from weeks to minutes. The guild's profit tripled in the first year. Kaelen saw none of it. They fed him enough to keep him functional and locked the door every night. When he asked to leave, Draven laughed. When he tried to leave, they broke his legs and made him heal himself, to remind him that his gift worked on his own body too. Which meant there was no injury they couldn't inflict that he couldn't fix. Which meant there was no limit to what they could do to him. 6 years of that. 6 years of healing monsters who called themselves heroes. 6 years of watching them toast victories that his hands made possible. 6 years of sleeping on a stone floor while they slept on silk. By the time Kaelen was 18, something inside him had changed. Not broken, changed. He stopped asking to leave. He stopped crying at night. He started watching. Every warrior who came through his healing room, he studied their injuries. Not to fix them better, to understand how they were made. If you know how to rebuild a muscle fiber by fiber, you also know how to tear it apart. If you can mend a shattered spine, you know exactly where to press to break it. If you can cure poison, you understand poison more intimately than any assassin alive. Divine restoration wasn't just healing. It was absolute knowledge of the human body. And absolute knowledge cuts both ways. On the night of his 18th birthday, alone in the basement, Kaelen made a decision. He placed his hand on his own chest and did something he'd never tried before. Instead of healing, he pushed his power inward, into his own body's limits. The golden light turned white, then blinding. His muscles screamed as they were rebuilt denser, stronger, faster. His bones cracked and reformed with crystal-like lattice structures. His nervous system rewired itself for reaction speeds that shouldn't be humanly possible. When the light faded, Kaelen stood up and punched the stone wall. His fist went through it like wet paper. He stared at the hole, flexing fingers that didn't even hurt. 6 years of healing others had taught him everything about the human body. Now he'd use that knowledge on himself. The lock on his door had always been iron. He wrapped his fingers around it and squeezed. The metal crumpled like tinfoil. Then Kaelen walked out. Not through the door, through the wall. The guild was celebrating a successful raid on the 3rd floor. Music, laughter, the clink of expensive glasses. Nobody heard the basement wall collapse because nobody ever listened for sounds from below. Kaelen climbed the stairs in silence. His bare feet left no sound on the stone. At the top, a guard turned and opened his mouth to shout. Kaelen placed his fingers on the guard's neck. Not a strike, just a touch. Every muscle in the man's body seized, and he dropped unconscious before the shout formed. Neural disruption, a technique Kaelen invented in his head during year 4 of captivity. The ability to overload a person's nervous system with a precisely calibrated burst of healing energy. Healing energy used in reverse, forcing the body to shut down instead of repair. He could have killed the guard. He chose not to. Not out of mercy. Because killing a guard wouldn't send the right message. The celebration on the 3rd floor was loud enough to feel through the walls. Kaelen pushed through the double doors and every head in the room turned. For one frozen second, the entire guild stared at the basement healers standing in the doorway. Barefoot, thin, with eyes that had spent 6 years memorizing how to unmake everything in the room. Draven reacted first, reaching for the sword on his hip. Kaelen crossed the distance before the blade cleared the scabbard. One palm pressed flat against Draven's chest. Not a punch, not a strike. A pulse of golden light that traveled through Draven's ribcage and into his heart muscle. Not to stop it, to remind it what pain feels like. Every nerve ending in Draven's chest fired simultaneously. 6 years of accumulated damage that Kaelen had been quietly cataloging. Every old injury Draven had ever asked Kaelen to heal, replayed in a single second. The Guild Master collapsed with a scream that silenced the entire building. Kaelen stood over him, golden light still flickering between his fingers. He looked around the room at 40 warriors who had walked past his locked door every day, Who had dropped broken bodies on his table and said fix this without looking him in the eye? Who had eaten 3 meals a day while he got scraps? Not one of them moved, because every single one of them had been healed by those hands. And every single one of them suddenly understood what those hands could do in reverse. Kaelen picked up Draven's fallen sword, not because he needed it, because it was the most expensive thing in the room and he'd earned it. Then he walked out the front door of the Crimson Fang Guild for the first time in 6 years. The night air hit his face, and he almost stumbled. Not from weakness, from the overwhelming sensation of breathing without walls around him. Stars above his head instead of stone ceiling. Wind on his skin instead of basement damp. He stood there for almost a minute just breathing. Then he started walking. He had nowhere to go. No money, no allies, no plan beyond getting as far away as possible. What he did have was a body rebuilt from the inside out. Knowledge of human anatomy that surpassed every doctor and assassin alive. And 6 years of fury compressed into something cold and patient and very, very precise. Kaelen didn't know where he was going, but he knew exactly what he was leaving behind. And he knew, with the certainty of someone who had studied every weakness the human body had, that nobody from that guild would ever touch him again. Dawn found him at the edge of a forest he'd never seen. His feet were bleeding from walking barefoot on roads he'd never walked. He healed them without thinking, golden light sealing the cuts between one step and the next. Then he heard a sound that changed everything. A child screaming from inside the tree line. Kaelen's body moved before his mind caught up. Through the brush, past broken branches, into a clearing where a little girl was cornered. A wolf-class monster, matted for streaked with something dark, jaws open. 3 adults lay on the ground around her, a merchant family ambushed on the forest road. 2 were breathing, barely. 1 was not. Kaelen reached the wolf before it reached the girl. 1 hand on its skull, a burst of neural disruption, and the creature dropped mid-lunge. Every synapse in its brain fired at once, and then went dark. The girl stared at him, trembling, tear tracks cutting through the dirt on her face. Kaelen knelt beside the 2 survivors and pressed his palms to their chest. Golden light flooded through them like sunrise through a window. Torn arteries sealed, cracked ribs fused, internal bleeding stopped. Within a minute, both adults were breathing normally. The third, the father, was already gone. Too long without blood to the brain. Even divine restoration had limits. The girl's name was Lyra. Her mother Sira woke up clutching her daughter and staring at Kaelen like he was a ghost. "You saved us," she whispered. Kaelen looked at the dead man on the ground and said nothing, because saving 2 out of 3 didn't feel like saving at all. He helped them reach the nearest town, a small trading post called Millhaven. Sira offered him money he didn't have room to carry and thanks he didn't know how to accept. He told her he needed work, any kind. She introduced him to the town's only doctor, an old man named Garrett. Garrett's clinic was a disaster. Crumbling walls, rusted tools, medicine shelves empty except for expired salves. The old man's hands shook too badly to perform basic suturing. Kaelen fixed a patient's dislocated shoulder in for seconds and Garrett nearly fell off his chair. He asked to stay. Garrett said yes before finishing his sentence. Within a week, Millhaven's clinic went from the town's joke to its most valuable building. Kaelen healed everything that walked through the door. Broken bones, infected wounds, chronic pain, childhood fevers, old war injuries. Miners with crushed hands walked out flexing perfect fingers. A farmer's wife who hadn't walked in 3 years stood up from the table and wept. Word spread fast in a small town. Within a month, people were traveling from 3 towns over just to see Kaelen. He charged what people could afford and healed for free when they couldn't. The money went to rebuilding the clinic. New walls, clean tools, a medicine garden behind the building. He used his knowledge of the body to create herbal remedies for conditions healing magic couldn't fix. Chronic fatigue, nutritional deficiencies, sleep disorders. Things that weren't injuries but slowly destroyed people's lives all the same. Garrett watched all of this and one evening asked the question Kaelen had been waiting for. "Where did you learn all this?" Kaelen considered lying, then decided the old man deserved better. "I was locked in a basement for 6 years healing guild warriors." Garrett's cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "You were a guild prisoner." "I was a guild tool," Kaelen corrected. "They locked the door, and I fixed what they broke until I figured out how to break things myself." Garrett set his cup down very carefully. "And now you're here, healing farmers' wives and miners' hands for copper coins." Kaelen almost smiled. It's quieter than a basement, but quiet never lasts for people the powerful have already marked. 3 months after Kaelen arrived, the Crimson Fang Guild sent a retrieval team. For B-rank warriors and a tracker, enough force to level a small town. They arrived at dawn and went straight to the clinic. The team leader, a man named Vardis, kicked the door open and announced the terms. Come back willingly, or we bring you back in pieces and you heal yourself on the way. Kaelen was bandaging a child's scraped knee when the door flew in. He finished the bandage before looking up. The child's mother pulled her son behind the counter, eyes wide with terror. Garrett reached for a scalpel, which was brave and pointless. Kaelen stood up slowly. He looked at Vardis the way a surgeon looks at an x-ray. Clinical, precise, already mapping every weakness. Old rotator cuff tear, left shoulder, healed badly. Hairline fracture in the right shin, never properly set. Liver damage from years of cheap potions, visible in the yellowing around his eyes. Vardis had no idea he was being diagnosed in the time it took him to blink. I'm not going back, Kaelen said. Vardis swung his sword. Kaelen didn't dodge. He stepped into the swing, placed his palm flat against the blade, and pushed. The steel shattered. Not blocked, not deflected, shattered, because Kaelen sent a resonance pulse through the metal. The same technique he used to find stress fractures in bones, applied to forged steel. The sword exploded into fragments that clattered across the clinic floor. Vardis stared at his empty hand. The other 3 warriors drew weapons simultaneously. Kaelen moved through them like water through stones. I touched a one man's wrist. The hand went limp and the axe fell. To fingers pressed against another's temple, consciousness gone before the next heartbeat. A palm on the third man's spine, every muscle below the waist locked rigid, and he toppled sideways. For seconds, warriors neutralized, not one of them bleeding. Vardis backed toward the door. Tell Draven, Kaelen said, voice flat as a surgical table, that the next team he sends won't walk home. Vardis ran. The town watched for unconscious warriors get dragged out by their leader, and the healer went back to bandaging the child's knee like nothing happened. After that, Millhaven changed the way it looked at Kaelen. Not as a healer anymore, not exactly. As something more complicated and more necessary. A protector who happened to heal. Or a healer who could protect. The distinction mattered less than the fact that for the first time, the town felt safe. People who had been paying protection money to bandit groups stopped paying. Merchants who avoided the forest roads started using it again. And when a group of displaced refugees arrived from a village burned by a rogue dungeon break, Kaelen healed every one of them and helped build temporary shelters from the clinic's lumber. Garrett was too old to keep up with the workload, so Kaelen started training assistants. Young people from the town and the refugees who showed aptitude for care. He taught them anatomy, herbalism, basic wound care, everything except the divine restoration. That couldn't be taught, only born with. But everything around it, the knowledge framework that made the gift useful, that was teachable. Within 6 months, Millhaven had the best trained medical team in the entire province. Not because of equipment or funding, because their teacher had spent 6 years memorizing the human body under the worst conditions, and was now sharing that knowledge with anyone willing to learn. The crisis that forced Kaelen out of hiding came from a direction nobody expected. Not the guild, not bandits, not monsters. A plague. It started in the mining district 3 towns east and spread along the trade roads. A fever that attacked the lungs, filling them with fluid until breathing became impossible. Conventional healing magic could slow it, but not stop it because the disease wasn't a wound. It was a living organism that adapted faster than standard treatment could keep up. Within 2 weeks, 300 people were sick. Within a month, 40 were dead. The provincial governor sent a request to every major guild and healing institution. Nobody came. Because the mining district was poor, the towns were small, and the disease was contagious. Risk versus reward, and the math didn't favor compassion. Kaelen heard about it from a merchant passing through and left the same afternoon. Garrett tried to stop him. You'll catch it yourself. I can't catch it, Kaelen said. My body rebuilds itself faster than any pathogen can replicate. He was right, and they both knew it. He arrived in the mining district to find a quarantine camp of canvas tents and a spare. Overworked local healers barely keeping patients alive with basic magic. Families crying outside barriers they weren't allowed to cross. Children too young to understand why their parents couldn't hold them. Kaelen walked past the quarantine barrier without stopping. A guard shouted at him. Kaelen placed his palm on the nearest patient and golden light erupted through the tent. The guard stopped shouting. In 12 hours, Kaelen treated over 100 patients. His divine restoration didn't just heal the symptoms, it mapped the pathogen's structure. By patient 50, he understood how it worked. By patient 100, he knew how to stop it. By patient 150, he had developed a herbal compound that could prevent infection. He wrote the formula on a piece of canvas and handed it to the camp's lead healer. Distribute this to every healthy person in the district. It won't cure the sick, but it'll stop anyone new from catching it. The lead healer stared at the formula like it was written in a dead language. How did you develop this in 12 hours? Kaelen was already walking to the next 10. I've had a lot of practice. The plague was contained within 2 weeks and eliminated within a month. Final death toll, 43, all before Kaelen arrived. 0 deaths after. The provincial governor came in person to thank him and offer a permanent position. Kaelen declined. He went back to Millhaven, back to the clinic, back to healing scraped knees. But the story didn't stay in the mining district. A healer who walked into a plague zone alone and cured 300 people in 2 weeks. Who developed a preventive compound in half a day. Who couldn't be infected because his body was something beyond normal human. That kind of story travels fast and reaches exactly the kinds of ears you don't want it to. The Royal Academy of Healers sent an envoy within the month. 3 senior healers and a knight commander, which was a polite way of saying come or else. The lead envoy was a woman named Grand Healer Thiesley. She examined Kaelen's clinic, watched him work for an hour, and asked him to demonstrate. He healed a compound fracture in 7 seconds while she took notes. Your technique is impossible, she said, not accusingly, but genuinely confused. You're not using standard restoration pathways. You're rebuilding tissue at the cellular level in real time. We don't have a classification for what you do. Kaelen shrugged. It works. Classification seems optional. The Academy offered him a position, funding, a lab, and the title of Royal Healer. Kaelen asked one question. Will I be free to leave when I want? Thiesley hesitated. That hesitation told him everything. Another cage, just with better food and a fancier lock. He declined. Thiesley left, but she left her personal seal with Garrett. If he ever changes his mind, or if he needs the Academy's resources, use this. Garrett put it in the medicine cabinet and never mentioned it, but he kept it because old men recognized the value of keeping options open. What came next was the part that changed Kaelen from a local miracle to a national threat. A courier arrived from the capital with a sealed letter bearing the royal crest. The crown princess was dying. A curse wound from an assassination attempt, dark magic embedded in the injury site. Every healer in the kingdom had tried and failed. The curse adapted to restoration magic, feeding on it, growing stronger with each attempt. The letter was blunt: come to the capital within 3 days or the princess dies. Kaelen read it twice and looked at Garrett. This is either a genuine emergency or the most elaborate trap ever written. Garrett looked at the royal seal. That seal is real. I served in the palace guard 40 years ago. Kaelen made his decision in the time it took to fold the letter. If it was real, someone was dying and he could help. If it was a trap, he'd deal with it the way he dealt with Vardis. He arrived at the capital in 2 days, traveling on foot at speeds that left carriage drivers gaping. His enhanced body could maintain a sprint that would exhaust a horse. The palace was chaos. Guards everywhere, healers arguing in hallways. He was escorted to the princess's chamber by 4 knights who watched him like he might explode. Crown Princess Alara lay on silk sheets, skin the color of ash, breathing shallow. A wound on her side pulsed with dark purple veins that spread outward like roots. 14 healers had tried, and 14 had made it worse. The court physician explained the situation while sweating through his robes. The curse absorbs restoration energy and converts it into more curse. Every healing attempt feeds the very thing killing her. Kaelen placed his hand 6 inches above the wound without touching. His divine restoration mapped the curse structure in seconds. It was clever, designed to use the body's own healing response as fuel. Standard healers poured energy in, and the curse ate it. Kaelen saw the solution immediately because he thought like a weapon, not a healer. Don't heal the wound, heal the curse. He pressed his palm to the wound, and instead of pouring energy into Alara's body, he sent a targeted pulse directly into the curse structure itself, treating the dark magic like a living organism, diagnosing its weak points, and flooding those weak points with precisely calibrated restoration energy. The curse tried to absorb the energy and choked. Because Kaelen wasn't healing Alara, he was healing the curse to death, overloading its ability to process energy until its internal structure collapsed. The dark purple veins shuddered, flickered, and began to recede. The court physician dropped his notes. Within 3 minutes, the curse was gone. Within 10 minutes, the wound was closed. Within an hour, Alara opened her eyes for the first time in 2 weeks. The room erupted. Healers shouting, guards crying, the court physician on his knees thanking every deity he knew. Kaelen stood beside the bed, golden light fading from his hands, saying nothing. Because saving the princess wasn't the hard part. The hard part was what happened next. The king arrived within the hour, flanked by advisors and generals. He looked at Kaelen the way Draven had looked at him 12 years ago. Not like a person, like a resource. The king offered him everything: title, estate, wealth, a position at court, all of which came with the same implicit condition every powerful person put on Kaelen. Stay where we can use you. Then Alara spoke from the bed, voice rough but steady. Father, ask him what he wants. The king blinked and turned to his daughter. He's a healer. What could he possibly want that I can't provide? Alara looked at Kaelen with eyes that had just come back from the edge of death. Ask him. The king, clearly unaccustomed to being told what to do, turned to Kaelen. What do you want? Kaelen thought about the basement, the locked door, the stone floor. About Draven's smile when he found a 12-year-old healing a stray dog. About 6 years of fix this without anyone looking him in the eye. About Vardas kicking in his clinic door and telling him to come back in pieces. About the academy envoy who hesitated when he asked if he'd be free to leave. I want a royal charter, he said, granting legal protection to every independent healer in the kingdom, guaranteeing that no healer can be conscripted, imprisoned, or forced into service by any guild, any institution, or any noble house, including the crown. The room went dead silent. The advisors looked like they'd swallowed something alive. The king's face went through several expressions before settling on genuine surprise. You could ask for anything, he said slowly. And you're asking me to limit my own power over healers. I'm asking you to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else. The silence stretched until Alara broke it. Granted, father. He just saved my life with hands that spent 6 years in chains. The least we can do is make sure no one else's hands end up in chains. The king signed the charter that evening. The Ashvane Accord, named after the healer who demanded it. Every independent healer in the kingdom was now legally protected from forced service. No guild, no noble, no institution could compel a healer to work against their will. Violation was a capital offense. The Crimson Fang Guild received a copy of the charter the next morning, along with an investigation order from the crown for their treatment of an unnamed healer. Draven disappeared before the investigators arrived. The guild was dissolved, its assets seized, its members scattered. Kaelen heard about it from Garrett over tea and felt nothing in particular. The rage he'd carried for 6 years had been used up building the charter. There was nothing left for revenge because the revenge had been structural, not personal. He didn't need to destroy the guild. He needed to destroy the system that let the guild exist. And he did, with a single piece of paper and a princess who asked the right question. Kaelen returned to Millhaven the next day. The clinic was exactly as he'd left it. Garrett was napping in the back room. A line of patients waited by the door. Lyra, now 7, was sitting on the front step reading a book about herbs. She looked up when he appeared and asked if he'd brought back anything interesting. He gave her a pressed flower from the palace garden and went inside to wash his hands. The line moved forward, and Kaelen started healing. The same way he had every day since he'd walked into this town. The same golden light. The same careful hands. The same quiet focus that made miracles look like routine. Except now, behind the clinic door, a royal charter hung framed on the wall, guaranteeing that the hands doing this work would never be chained again. Not his, not anyone's. That was enough. That was more than enough. Over the following year, the Ashvane Accord reshaped the kingdom's medical landscape. Healers who had been working under guild contracts with no exit clause walked free. Independent clinics opened in towns that had never had one. Young people with healing aptitude no longer had to choose between guild servitude and poverty. They could train freely, practice independently, and charge fair prices. The guilds that survived adapted, offering partnerships instead of contracts. The ones that didn't adapt collapsed under the weight of their own cruelty. And at the center of all of it, in a small town clinic, with a medicine garden behind it, Kaelen kept healing. Not because anyone made him, because he chose to. That choice, the difference between being forced and choosing, was the entire point of everything he'd fought for. The ability to heal wasn't the gift. The freedom to decide when and how and for whom to use it. That was the gift. And it had taken 6 years in a basement and a walk through a palace to understand it. Kaelen's reputation continued to grow despite his best efforts to keep a low profile. Patients traveled from across the kingdom. He never turned anyone away. He never charged more than someone could afford. He never healed less than his absolute best. And he never, not once, locked his clinic door. The door stayed open because closed doors meant something different to Kaelen. They meant stone walls and iron locks and a boy healing monsters from men who called him a tool. His door would stay open until the building fell down. And if it fell down, he'd build another one with the door already open. Princess Alara visited the clinic once, unannounced, traveling without royal guard. She walked in wearing common clothes and waited in line like everyone else. When Kaelen saw her, he almost dropped the bandage he was wrapping. She said she wanted to see where the man who saved her life actually lived. He showed her the clinic, the garden, the medicine shelves he'd built himself, the room behind the counter, where he slept on a cot that was barely an upgrade from stone. She looked at the cot and then at him. "You could have a palace bed. This bed doesn't come with conditions," he replied. She laughed. and it was the first time Kaelen realized royalty could sound genuine. Before she left, she asked him something that stuck with him. Do you ever regret not taking the title? No. Do you ever regret the charter? Not for a single second. She nodded like she'd confirmed something important. Good, because my father's advisors have been trying to revoke it for 6 months. They won't succeed. I know, she said, because every time they try, I read them the part about capital offense and they get very quiet. She left with a bag of herbal tea and a pressed flower from the garden. Kaelen went back to work. The years passed the way years do in a place built on quiet purpose. The clinic grew, the town grew, the network of free healers across the kingdom grew. Kaelen trained 47 medical assistants who went on to open their own practices, each one carrying a piece of the knowledge he'd accumulated in his basement years. Knowledge born from suffering, refined through compassion, shared without condition. Garrett passed away peacefully in the back room on a Tuesday afternoon. Kaelen was holding his hand, golden light keeping the old man comfortable to the very end. Not healing him, because Garrett had asked him not to. Just easing the passage. I'm glad you walked in that day, Garrett whispered at the end. Best thing that ever happened to this clinic. Kaelen buried him in the medicine garden and planted chamomile over the grave. Because Garrett always said chamomile was the only medicine that didn't need magic. Lyra, now 12, the same age Kaelen was when Draven found him, started learning medicine full-time at the clinic. She had no healing magic, but her hands were steady and her mind was sharp. She memorized herb combinations faster than anyone Kaelen had ever trained. One day she asked him the question every student eventually asked. Why don't you teach us the golden light? Because I can't, he said honestly. It's something I was born with. But everything I know about how bodies work, how disease spreads, how injuries heal, that's knowledge, not magic, and knowledge can be taught. She thought about it for a moment. So the magic is yours, but the medicine is everyone's. Kaelen looked at her and felt something he didn't have a word for. Something like hope wearing a 12-year-old's face. Exactly, he said. The medicine is everyone's. That became the unofficial motto of the Millhaven Clinic. And eventually of every clinic in the network. The medicine is everyone's. Carved into the door frame by Lyra's own hand when she was 14. And copied by every graduate who opened their own practice. Until the words appeared above clinic doors across the entire kingdom. A quiet revolution that started with a boy healing a stray dog. And ended with a nation that could never again chain a healer to a basement wall. Kaelen never left Millhaven permanently. He traveled when emergencies called. A plague here, a curse wound there. But he always came back. Always to the same clinic, the same garden, the same open door. Because home wasn't about the building. It was about the choice to stay. A choice nobody had given him for the first 18 years of his life. A choice he'd earned by walking through a wall and never looking back. Some nights, alone in the clinic after the last patient left, Kaelen would hold his hands up to the lamplight and look at them. The same hands that had been locked behind iron for 6 years. The same hands that shattered a sword with a resonance pulse. The same hands that cured a plague in 12 hours. The same hands that healed a curse that 14 other healers couldn't touch. The same hands that wrote a charter protecting every healer in the kingdom. The same hands that held an old man's hand while he died peacefully. The same hands that planted chamomile on his grave. The same hands that bandaged a child's scraped knee this morning. All the same hands. The ones Draven saw glowing gold over a stray dog and decided to cage. The ones the kingdom now depended on and couldn't control. Not because Kaelen wouldn't help. Because he'd made sure nobody could ever force him to. That distinction, between willingness and obligation, was everything. It was the locked door versus the open one. The basement versus the clinic. The chains versus the charter. Kaelen lowered his hands and turned off the lamp. Tomorrow there would be patients. A farmer with a bad back, a miner with dust in his lungs. Maybe a traveler with something rare that would challenge his knowledge. Maybe just scraped knees and common colds. It didn't matter. Big or small, every patient got the same hands, the same light, the same care. Because that was the whole point. Not the spectacular saves or the royal charters or the plague cures. The daily, quiet, unglamorous work of healing one person at a time. That was what Kaelen chose. Every morning, when he opened the clinic door and let the light in, he was choosing it again. Freely. Without chains, without orders, without anyone standing behind him with a locked door. Just a healer in a small town, doing what healers are supposed to do. Helping. They took a 12-year-old orphan and locked him in a basement. They used his gift until his hands shook from exhaustion every night. They fed him scraps and called him a tool and broke his legs to teach him obedience. And 6 years later, that same boy walked through a wall, shattered a sword with his palm, dropped for warriors without drawing blood, Cured a plague that nobody else could touch. Healed the princess that 14 healers had given up on. And stood in front of a king and asked not for gold, not for power, not for revenge, but for a piece of paper that said no healer would ever be caged again. That's Kaelen Ashvane, the boy who was locked in a basement and came out a force of nature. Who could break every bone in your body with a touch, and chose to heal scraped knees instead. Not because he had to, because that's what freedom actually looks like. The freedom to be gentle when you have the power to destroy. The freedom to choose who you help, and when and why. The freedom to open a door that was locked for 6 years and leave it open forever. Draven wanted a tool. The Academy wanted a resource. The king wanted a weapon. Kaelen wanted a clinic with an open door and a garden full of chamomile. Guess which one of them actually changed the world? Not the guild that exploited him. Not the academy that tried to recruit him. Not the king who wanted to own him. The healer who said no to all of them and went back to work. Because the real power was never the golden light in his hands. It was the word no, said quietly, without violence, without anger, without negotiation. Just no, I won't be your tool. No, I won't be your weapon. No, I won't be your prisoner. I'll be a healer in a clinic with a door that's always open. And if you try to close that door, I'll write a law that makes closing it a crime. That's not rebellion. That's not revenge. That's just a man who knows his own worth and refuses to let anyone else define it. The basement tried to define him as a tool. He defined himself as a healer. The guild tried to define him as property. He defined himself as free. The kingdom tried to define him as an asset. He defined himself as a person with an open door and calloused hands. And that self-definition, held firm through 6 years of darkness and 12 years of light, built something stronger than any kingdom or guild or curse. A network of healers who can't be chained. A charter carved into law. A clinic where the door never closes. A garden where chamomile grows over a good man's grave. A town that used to be afraid and isn't anymore. A princess who asks the right questions. A girl named Lyra who carved the medicine as everyone's into a door frame. And a kingdom that will never again mistake a healer for a tool. All because one boy refused to stay in a basement, walked through a wall, and opened a door that he swore would never be locked again. The morning light hits the clinic first, every day. Because Kaelen built it facing east on purpose. So the first thing patients see when they arrive is light pouring through the open door. Not darkness, not a locked gate, not a guard asking for credentials. Just light, and a healer inside, ready to help. That's the image that stays. Not the basement, not the chains, not the 6 years of suffering. The open door, the golden light, the hands that could destroy anything and choose to heal everything. That's Kaelen Ashvane's legacy. Not power, not revenge. Not the spectacular moments that made people gasp. The quiet mornings. The scraped knees. The chamomile tea. The door that's always open. The choice made fresh every single day. To be gentle when the world taught him to be hard. They locked a healer in a cage for 6 years. He came out, healed a kingdom, and built a law that said never again. Then he went back to his clinic and kept working. Because the work was never about proving anything to the people who hurt him. It was about the people he could still help. And those people, the farmers and miners and children and refugees, never ran out. They never will. So Kaelen won't stop. Golden light in calloused hands, an open door, and a medicine garden in the back. That's not the end of the story. That's every morning for the rest of his life. And every morning, without fail, he'll choose the same thing. To heal. Freely. Without chains. Without conditions. Without anyone standing behind him deciding who deserves to be fixed. Everyone deserves to be fixed. That's what 6 years in a basement taught him. Not bitterness. Clarity. The world is full of broken things and broken people. And somewhere in a small town clinic, with chamomile growing in the garden, there's a man with golden hands who will fix every single one that walks through his door. No questions asked. No payment required. No door ever locked. The boy they caged became the man who freed them all. Not with violence. Not with revenge. With a charter, and a clinic, and the stubborn refusal to be anything less than kind. That's real power. The kind that doesn't break things. The kind that fixes them. Lyra is 20 now and runs 3 clinics of her own. Each one has the words carved above the door. The medicine is everyone's. She still visits Millhaven every month to bring Kaelen new herb samples, and to sit in the garden beside the chamomile and tell him about her patients. He listens the way he does everything, carefully, completely, with full attention. The same attention he gave to broken bones and cursed wounds and dying princesses, given now to a girl telling him about a farmer's stubborn cough. Because to Kaelen, there is no difference. A princess and a farmer both deserve the same care. That was always the point. The medicine is everyone's. No exceptions. No hierarchies. No locked doors. Just healing, given freely, by hands that chose to be gentle. In a world that tried its hardest to make them cruel. The basement couldn't do it. The guild couldn't do it. The kingdom couldn't do it. 6 years of darkness and 12 years of light. And the hands are still gentle. Still golden. Still open. Still healing. Every single day. That's the story of Kaelen Ashvane, the healer they locked in a cage, who came out and changed the world. Not by breaking things, by fixing them. One patient at a time. One open door at a time. One quiet morning at a time. Until the whole kingdom smelled like chamomile, and every healer in it could say, without fear, without chains, without permission, I choose to help. 3 words, worth more than any sword or crown or cage. I choose to help. And the door stays open.